Okay, so I quickly wanted to talk to you today about testing components in amps and how you can easily be tricked. So I've had this happen a few times to me where there's a particular problem with an amp, and I sort of go through and, from looking at the schematics, I usually get a game plan in place as to where the issue could be depending on what's happening. So anyway, this example, these are diodes that are sort of protection diodes that are on the high voltage output, tube output for a Peavey amplifier. These are normally SR series diodes, I don't know, 2873 or something like that. Or no, these ones were GP 1250s, SR 2073 or whatever the designation is what's in the schematics. But anyway, they're basically the same type of diode. So sometimes what will happen is you can test a diode and it will actually seem to test good, and this goes for other components as well. I've had this happen with resistors and capacitors. They'll test good, but in circuit, as soon as you put power on them, or maybe once a certain temperature is reached, they start to fail and not work as accurately. So I can't remember which one of these it was. Okay, so for this type of diode, a reading of around 1, a little above, is sort of the norm. I'm saying this after the fact because I sort of know that. But this one here was the one. See, now it's not going to do it. But originally, because this one's only showing 73, so you'd automatically assume that this was bad. When I initially had tested this, when I first pulled it out of the amp, it was actually testing between 5 and 600. I think it measured like 570 something. So I initially thought that this diode was okay. And I went on and checked a bunch of other things, but then I came back and realized that this pretty much had to be the issue. And when I flipped over to my ohm reading, there was actually an ohm reading of about 80 ohms across it, so I knew that the diode was bad. But I use that as an example because at least with diodes, don't just rely on diode test mode to tell you whether a diode's good. If it measures in spec, whether it's between, whether 500 is good or 1.1 is good. You can't necessarily rely on that because certain components can kind of trick you in that way. Test for DC resistance. Figure out a way that you can put a certain component in circuit with some type of voltage on it, or put a current across it. And these are types of tests, when you need to go deeper, when nothing else is sort of making sense, and theoretically you've sort of come to a point where you know that the issue is in this area, but you can't exactly find a bad component. Now, sometimes it's not worth going through all that. Sometimes when you get into, you find a rail that, is dumping voltage to ground, if there's only like 5-10 cent components on that rail, just replace them all. Don't even mess around with that. Or at least pull all those components and make sure that there's not a problem with the circuit board itself or something like that. But then go and replace all the components and you've taken care of your issue. But when you have a lot of components on a particular rail, you can't just trust that one set of measurements